That music never gets old, no matter what generation you are. And this is coming from a kid that was born for the 1990s. Welcome back, everybody. Pro Wrestling Experience here on ChicagolandSportsRadio.com. We are the fastest rising pro wrestling talk show. We promote the positivity and the history of pro wrestling here every single Wednesdays on ChicagolandSportsRadio.com and WLGKLogicRadio.com. Glad to have one of our first guests today. He's the co-host of CBS Play.It's podcast, WOOOO Nation, with the one and only Nature Boy Ric Flair. It's at Hey, it's Conrad. It's Conrad Thompson coming down from the dirty South. What's going on, brother?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me. That's a heck of a woo there. Nature Boy's got some competition.
I know, right? So how's things are going down there in the South? I heard the podcast this morning on the way down to the studio with JJ. You guys mentioned you were at Raw this past Monday night. How was it?
Oh, it was fantastic. You know, he had the entire family in town, Nature Boy did, for really Charlotte's debut. I know she's been on Raw a few times, but she's officially on the main roster now, and it's obviously a proud moment for him and a big day. And, you know, there were just a couple of years past the passing of her brother Reed, and it was just a very emotional day, and the whole family was there, and it couldn't have went any better. And
you're talking about it earlier in the podcast, you know, I listen to podcasts each weekend. Obviously, we get to hear more of Nature's stories outside the ring and all the crazy stuff that always comes with Ric Flair, no matter who's on the show. Last week was with Kevin Sullivan, and we're just about almost 20 episodes into this podcast already. Do you have a favorite episode yet so far?
Well, I really enjoyed the Terry Funk one. Every time we finish one, I tend to think, hey, that may be our best one. But the Terry Funk one is one that will stick out for a long time. Just because Terry's such a big personality. And, you know, Terry Funk has obviously never even listened to a podcast. But, man, he hit a home run with that one. And if you haven't already, you should do yourself a favor and check it out. It's over at Play.It right now. You can just search for Ric Flair or, of course, WOOOO Nation.
Speaking of that, how did this come to be? Did you have experience in broadcasting beforehand? And how did this WOOOO Nation come to be?
Well, it's really funny. I met Rick a few years ago through an appearance, and we just hit it off and became fast friends. And I live in Alabama. He's living in Georgia these days, and so we just wound up being really good friends who had a lot of similar interests in cars and sports and stuff like that. And he made an appearance on Austin's podcast, and everybody was interested. So his agent started to field a few offers from different providers kind of in the podcasting realm. Ultimately, they made the decision to go with CBS because they were launching a new platform, and obviously CBS Radio has been around forever. So Play.It ultimately got the contract signed with Rick's agent, and he knew that I could do it or would be a good sidekick for him just because of our natural rapport and friendship. And I actually do a little bit of advertising on the radio for my mortgage company, but I have no professional broadcast experience whatsoever. I just really appreciate wrestling. I really want to help my friend, and I love talking about wrestling. So it was a good fit. He's happy. CBS is happy, and hopefully the listeners are enjoying it as well.
It comes through the air every time I listen to the episode, and Rick always mentions that. He says, like, you're an encyclopedia of wrestling, and you're, like, Junior Meltzer and all that good stuff. And I think that's a compliment, too, because a lot of people tell me that, too, and I study a lot of the business, and seeing Rick on those Legends of Wrestling panels they used to do on Classics on Demand, I thought those were great. I think that'd be another cool addition. They did that in the network, some new episodes. Speaking of Rick, were you in the Raw Chicago when they did the tribute to Dusty?
No, I was not there. We taped the podcast the very next day, but to my surprise, that thing was very well received. I thought that, you know, a lot of times it seems like everybody on the internet has something negative to say about anything WWE does, but that thing was very well received. I enjoyed it. It kind of reminded me a lot of those old Legends of the Roundtable deals they did on demand, and I hope they do more of those, but I really enjoyed it, and I haven't heard one critique outside of Michael Hayes suggesting that perhaps Vince McMahon didn't put a table in front of him just as a rib. He wanted to put four heavier guys with no table in front of them just because he thought it would be funny. But outside of that, man, it's getting glowing reviews, and I hope they do more like it. I really enjoyed it.
Hey, speaking of those panels and stuff, and you Let's get to know you a little bit. I'm sure you have a versatile list of wrestling promotions you watched growing up as a kid. Was there any one promotion that stood out the most to you?
Well, I was born in 1981, so by the time I started watching wrestling, Hulkamania was full-blown running wild. So I first probably watched, I guess my first wrestling memory is WrestleMania 4, and then I started to just kind of catch the bug. And then we started tape trading with a guy my dad worked with. He would get the NWA or WCW pay-per-views, and we would get the WWF pay-per-views and then swap the next day. And just a love of wrestling was established, I guess 7, 8, 9 years old. Kind of fell out of it. I think a lot of wrestling fans go through that period where they just kind of lose interest, and that happened for me sometime in 1992. But then 4 or 5 years later, I'm flipping through the channels, and I see Hulk Hogan in all black, and I wonder, hey, what the heck's going on? So we checked that out, and, man, I was hooked again. So I've kind of faded in and out over the years, but I've always tried to subscribe to Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer newsletter. I've been fascinated by the kind of behind-the-scenes goings-on of the business, and Dave does a great job of covering that, better than anybody else that I know of.
Do you think wrestling fans take wrestling for granted due to platforms like that?
I do, and here's what I had a good conversation over the weekend about this, where let's say your favorite football team is the Chicago Bears. You may think in that very moment that you know exactly what play should have been called, but you really don't know anything about football, and you don't know anything about that defense, and you don't know anything about what the player personnel is. You think you do, but in that moment you think, man, why did they not do this? They should have did this play instead of that play. And I think that's kind of what wrestling fans do. And in football they call it Monday morning quarterbacking or armchair quarterbacking, but that's kind of what happens in wrestling. And it's interesting that they don't really do that as fans. I mean, in any other form of entertainment, people aren't, booing and posting hate messages about The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
They're just digesting it as it comes, and then having a conversation about, I wonder what's coming next. Not critiques of, they should have done this instead of that. And a lot of times people wonder, hey, why did they do that? Well, because the billionaire who owns it said so. I mean, that really is the long and short of it, and that's not the answer that wrestling fans want, but, it's kind of the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah, I totally agree. And do you see that? I was talking about this in my last segment before you called in, about how wrestling fans are self-entitled, and I was talking about Cody and Stardust making his return to Raw this past Monday night, and maybe for me, just being a longtime fan of the business, I can see that's something that Cody wanted to do for himself and make that gimmick be over for himself. But all I saw on Twitter on Monday night while I was covering the show was people ripping WWE and how you dropped the ball with Cody coming back as himself in Atlanta in that old NWA territory. And I'm like, you self-entitled bastards.
Yeah, I mean, the situation is Cody didn't want to use a real-life situation of his father passing as an angle. But in addition to that, I think a lot of younger fans maybe don't appreciate what an ode to his dad and what a nod to his dad continuing to wrestle under the name Stardust is.
Yeah.
Stardust was what Dusty called himself, and it's what Dusty had on his tights. If you just Google Stardust and the name Dusty Rhodes, you'll see pictures of him wearing a brass knuckles world championship right there out of Texas with Stardust, plain as day, embroidered right on his trunks. The Jim Crockett Promotions jet, the new one that they got, they had an older plane and then they got a new one. It had Stardust on the tail, and that was because that was Dusty's plane. So I don't think there could have been a better tribute than him continuing to go out there as Stardust, which is the name that his dad had for his plane, for his booking, for his ideas. I mean, even his biggest pay-per-view, his biggest creation of all, was Starrcade. I mean, Stardust is a name that is synonymous with Dusty Rhodes, and I think it was a great tribute. And maybe the fans who were criticizing that just thought they knew Dusty and maybe didn't have an understanding of the history of who Dusty was and the way he booked.
We're talking to Conrad Thompson. He's the co-host of the WOOOO Nation podcast with the one and only Ric Flair. It comes out on Wednesdays on Play.It. You can check it out on the Apple or Google Play, wherever you get your podcast from. But Play.It, best luck to get into the podcast. And they do a lot of cool episodes, a lot of great episodes. The Bret Hart one stands out. Kurt Angle, of course. speaking of the podcast and other stuff, we're doing this show on a Wednesday, and now we have 4 wrestling shows every Wednesday night. And a lot of the talk inside the wrestling business, what company is going to make themselves stand out to be the next legit competition to WWE since WCW's been gone for almost 16 years now. So we haven't really heard you guys talk about TNA or Lucha or any of the other companies on the podcast yet. What's your thoughts on all these wrestling companies having 4 shows on Wednesday nights?
Well, I mean, here's the situation. There is no competition, and that's not really fun for anybody to hear, but the reality is there's only been one successful promotion in the history of professional wrestling that was sustainable, and that's WWE. You know, other companies had runs for 10 or 15 or 20 years, but eventually they all went belly up. So if history's told us anything, it's that all these other companies are going to go belly up, especially, the companies who don't have television. If you don't have television, you're dead. So I know Jeff Jarrett's making a run right now, but until he announces a television deal, I mean, he's just an independent. He's not going to make it. I personally really enjoy the Ring of Honor product. I haven't kept up with it as much as I used to. I haven't really watched much TNA lately, but once upon a time I thought TNA was very good. I enjoyed some of the very early stuff in Nashville. Any promotion has hit or miss stuff, but they were really trying to innovate and create some fun stuff. But we don't talk about any of those other promotions, including Lucha Underground on the show, and I'm kind of peeling back the curtain here, because Rick doesn't watch them, so I can't have a conversation with him about, Vampiro's commentary if he doesn't watch it. So we don't talk about it just because Rick's not interested in it. As far as Rick's concerned, it's WWE or nothing. And obviously you would expect him to say that, given the fact that, he's a performer with them, his daughter's a performer with them. I just don't see us really focusing on any other promotion unless we have a TNA performer, like when we had Kurt Angle as our very first guest. If we have somebody from TNA on, then we'll talk about it, but I think then we would still try to stick to talking about the time that they spent in TNA together, more so than, hey, here's the angle on television right now, just because Rick's not keeping up with it.
Yeah, I understand. It's all cool. I understand. A couple more things before we let you go, Conrad. We got Battleground coming up on Sunday from St. Louis. It's going to be an interesting show. I looked at the full card this morning. Some really good matches. What matches are you looking forward to the most on Sunday?
I'm actually really looking forward to this. I'm actually going to go to this one. This is one that I think is worth checking out, even if you're a casual fan. I think Bray Wyatt and Roman Reigns are 2 very underrated performers. I think Bray Wyatt is the single-handedly most underused. And I know he's lost a little bit of steam because he's been putting a lot of guys over, but I want to see that match. Seeing him wrestle live is very impressive every time. Of course, I'm like everybody else on the Internet. I love Kevin Owens. I'm really excited to see what John Cena's been doing with him. Their match, I guess, last month in Columbus, Ohio, is still one of the very best matches I've ever seen live. The crowd was into it. Up and down they went. I really enjoyed that. And then the main event, I don't know that this one's been talked about enough. I think there's going to be something fun happening in this one. I'm not trying to tease that I know what's going to happen. I don't. But I really do think that's going to be one that we're going to be talking about for the next few weeks.
It's going to be a really interesting show, and I remember most recent Battlegrounds a couple years ago, a lot of people rag-tagged that pay-per-view for the name and what was on those pay-per-views over the past couple years. So this one's going to be really interesting, and I really think this is the one show to watch if you're really wondering what's going to happen for SummerSlam this year, right?
SummerSlam is like the second biggest show behind WrestleMania. They're doing it in a huge market last year, and for the last several years they've done it in L.A., but this year they're making a whole weekend of it with NXT the night before in the same building, Raw the very next night in the same building, and obviously it's in New York, so it's going to be a really big show. I think we're going to see a lot of really fun matches set up for SummerSlam coming out of Battleground, and that's why I'm really looking forward to the main event. I'm not sure that everybody knows everything that's going to shake out there yet, but I expect the main event to be a barn burner. And just about any time Brock Lesnar's on pay-per-view, can't miss television. You should check it out this Sunday.
Absolutely. One last thing before we let you go, buddy. WrestleMania 32 going big time. Big D in Dallas at AT&T Stadium next year. Austin already said that he's not going to do it, but what big matches do you think would bring in 100,000 people into AT&T Stadium?
I think just WWE WrestleMania being on the marquee is going to bring 100,000 in. I do think Rock will be involved. just because Rock is very much a history guy. If they're aiming for 100,000, then this will be the show they finally announce as breaking Hogan and Andre's record from WrestleMania 3. Him being such a history guy, he doesn't do it for the money. I think he would be interested in being on that show just to say he was in the main event. So I would see him and Triple H maybe involved with Ronda in one corner and Stephanie in another. I don't think that the UFC would allow Ronda to fight, but she could certainly stand in someone's corner and maybe do a clothesline or an armbar or something here or there. I don't think we'll see Sting outside of waving to the crowd after he's been inducted into the Hall of Fame. I do think we'll see The Undertaker one more time. Maybe Stone Cold could be the third person in the ring with Rock and Triple H. He could be like a special guest referee. But I don't think that we'll see Austin wrestle, and I don't think that we'll see Sting wrestle, but I still think we'll see 100,000 folks there, or at least more than they announced for WrestleMania 3. There's just no way they're going to announce one person less than WrestleMania 3.
Follow Conrad at Twitter at Hey It's Conrad. Check out Conrad's work with Rick on WOOOO Nation every week on Play.It. Conrad, I had a blast. I wish we could do this longer, maybe next time, but you're a great guy. I enjoy your work on the podcast. Would love to do this again, and hopefully get to talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I'd love to come back anytime, and thanks for all the plugs for WOOOO Nation, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, guys.